Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another edition of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller, along with Mike Hightower here in studio. Our colleague Mike Tolbert is joining us from his home studio at the farm. And as we begin, we want to, of course, thank our sponsor, Alan Bliss, and our friends at the Jacksonville Historical Society, which is located inside the Jacksonville History Center, for their support, and to the many donors, by the way, who continue to make this program possible. It's really great of them to do so.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Bender is professor of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of North Florida. He returns as our Mike on Mike guest. Dr. Bender is also faculty director of UNF's Public Opinion Research Laboratory. The UNF Public Opinion Research Laboratory has conducted and released a new poll of registered voters regarding the proposed deal between the Jaguars and the city to remove, or renovate, I should say, some people wish it were removed, but to renovate the football stadium into a stadium of the future. Today, Dr. Bender is going to help us dissect those polling results and give us a better understanding of what the public really thinks about this and why. Mr. Tolbert from the farm, you kick it off for us, sir.
Welcome back, Dr. Bender. Good to see you, even if you're not here. Just like me.
Oh, thanks for having me. You inspire me.
First of all, tell us about the mechanics of the poll. When and how was it conducted, and how many voters were interviewed?
So this was a poll that was conducted in two ways, multi-modes, which is really kind of what everybody's doing nowadays in different forms. Back at the end of May 21st through the 23rd, we had 667 registered voters from Duval County, and it was a mix of telephone, and then we texted folks a link, and they were able to complete that on an online platform.
Last September, you, you were our guest, but also at that time, UNF released a poll on this same subject, and we were all a little bit surprised that the jail was more popular than the stadium. However, now that we understand the deal is on the table, there are some differences. Can you kind of tell us where we are and why those differences?
Yeah, I think that the short answer is the stadium deal has gotten a little more popular, maybe, if you look at it in totality, and we can break that down and talk about it. But specifically for the jail, in a very weird sense, it's still more popular than the stadium. And like we talked about last time in the jail, you know, the number that we used for the jail last year was much smaller because those were the numbers that were available. The recent committee report that came out tagged it at about $1 billion, and we used that $1 billion number. And still, 73% of the people were like, yes, I support either strongly or somewhat investing this kind of money in a new jail. And we didn't attach how that would get paid for or anything like that. But the idea that these folks understand, they want to invest in the jail to A, get it out of downtown, and then B, upgrade it or expand it. But maybe they think a jail is actually something the city should be spending money on. It's a public good as opposed to maybe money being handed over to a billionaire.
I just wonder if I can just jump in I just wonder whether or not those people who were polled in that thought perhaps that by enlarging the jail and moving it, which is what the proposal is, that this is in a way going to affect the crime rate that we have in Jacksonville, thinking the bigger the jail, boy, crime is going to go down now because they've got room to put these criminals away.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Is there saying we need a new jail because we need a place because we got more bad people?
Well, it's not just that, right? Because you're short. The short Q shorts that you would use, maybe Republicans want the jail to lock everybody up, and the Democrats want the jail because they're soft on crime and they want to, make these people more comfortable and all those sorts of things. But it's equally supported across all parties. Democrats are at 75% support, Republicans 69%, independents at 75%. So everybody wants it. And I think there has been a great deal of attention paid to the quality of the jail over the last 6 months, a year, particularly a lot of the local coverage highlighting some of the deaths and some of the problems with the lack of health care in the jail and the overcrowding. But there's also been a consistent theme that having a jail smack dab in the heart of downtown isn't great for development and improving the downtown area. So I think it's a multi-front assault on the jail to kind of move it out of there and get it going. But yeah, how that gets paid for is I'm glad I'm not the one making that decision. Let's just put it that way.
Most polls like to ask the question, what is the most important problem facing the city? But in this poll, you kind of twisted that question, didn't you? You asked it in a different way. Tell us how you questioned it differently and then what the results were from that.
Yeah, and part of the reason that we did that, because we usually do the most important problem, excuse me, is this poll was entirely about the stadium. We would not have done it if the stadium deal hadn't been proposed, and so it's focused on that. So we were thinking about, well, that's a lot of money, and let's think about this in terms of tax dollars. So we asked folks, what is your top priority for the investment of tax dollars in the city of Jacksonville? And infrastructure was number one, followed by education, and then public safety or the police, followed by, after that, affordable housing and homelessness, and then much further down the list, the stadium or the Jaguars. And, I think that's telling in some sense that the traditional investments of city government, infrastructure, education, are the things that folks want to be spending money on. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And even though, as we'll talk about, people are willing to spend money on the stadium, it's clearly not a top priority for them. I was a little bit surprised, mostly because this is not a question that we typically ask. And, infrastructure investments, it makes sense, right? I just didn't think about it. And I didn't have a great expectation going in how this would turn out. But, the stadium being so low, considering it was literally all over the news for a couple of days going in, was a little bit of a surprise.
Compare the infrastructure, public safety, and education results of the poll with what is said about the renovated stadium expense.
Yeah, so 23% for infrastructure was number one. Education was 19%. Police and public safety was 13%. So, just kind of back of the hand math there, that's almost 60%, over 50% of the population wants those things. The Jags came in at 3%. And there is no demographic split where it's more than 4 or 5%. So this is the type of thing that a few people think it's very important. And, I might guess that those folks are big Jags fans, but that's it. And it's really kind of something that everybody wants to spend money on, the things that government spends money on, collective goods, infrastructure, police and fire safety, those types of things, and education.
I'm curious, Dr. Bender, that public safety came in, it sounded like third in your list, and people think that crime is out of control. I'm wondering why you think it was in third. Was it because the sheriff gets so much money as it is?
That's a great question, and this is something that we've been doing most important problem in Duval County for a decade now, under my watch at least. And it's either crime or, on the off chance, it's the economy if the economy is going really badly. And it's been crime lately, and it's been crime by a mile. So yeah, the idea that it's so low, and I mean by so low, 13%, third place, think that should be their top priority. It was a little bit surprising. And yeah, I mean, listen, they are the big budgetary winner in Jacksonville as far as resources go. The sheriff's office gets a lot of money. They're up over $500 million, and quite likely more, particularly when you're talking about pay raises for officers and even potentially expanding. We'll see what the next budget looks like, but that's a lot of resources. So I certainly think that could be some of it. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and on that point, if I remember correctly, the way the new legislation and the new statute's gone through is he can use that, he can move that money around without, he has total authority, and he doesn't have to report it or hold or be accountable for it. It's his discretion of how he uses, because I think it's going close to $700 million. So he can do it any way he wants, and he doesn't have to tell us how or who or where it was spent.
It gets told where it gets spent, but he doesn't need pre-authorization to spend it. We find out what happens to the money on the back end. But again, right, there's an election every 4 years. I guess that's the enforcement mechanism. People are using that argument a lot when it comes to spending a lot of money. Hey, there was an election, you voted me in. So I guess he's not immune to that either.
I guess ask for forgiveness, not permission.
I'm a big believer.
Dr. Bender, in addition to the stadium and jail, we heard some pretty big numbers recently about the money needed for downtown development, and that's always been controversial. We've talked about it here, especially DDA. The poll said that 39% said the investment in downtown is critical to the city's growth. Were you surprised that they talked about downtown development?
Listen, this is one of those circumstances where I'm generally under the opinion that we have a good downtown. It's active, it's burgeoning, it's growing. It's just not located at the address that some people like to think. It's called the town center, right? The town center is really our downtown. There's commerce, there's people that live there, it's crowded, there's things happening. That's our downtown. But the fact that these numbers were so high, yeah, you mentioned the 39% that said it's critical. There's another 28% that says, listen, I see the potential benefits. I have some reservations, but I'm willing to invest down there. That's big, right? You're talking 67%, 2/3 of the sample are either all in or pretty darn near all in, supportive of investing down there. Shocked. Like you asked me earlier if, this surprises me or that surprises me. Every time I do media and I release a poll, what surprised you? And most of the time I'm edging, I'm fishing, I'm making something up. I was baffled. I was absolutely astonished because, and this is the part that drives it home. We ask people how often they go downtown for leisure, and 24% never go downtown. So this is a completely foreign land to them. And another 46% only go downtown a few times per year. So that's 70% of the sample that either is never down there or hardly ever down there. And still, 48% of those groups are supportive of this stuff. And it's, I am, baffled. Like they want to spend this money on downtown development. I personally may have a different opinion, but listen, this is about what the voters of Duval counties have to say.
Let's get into the CBA a little bit, the Community Benefits Agreement. As a reminder, the mayor, of course, and the Jaguars agreed to each put up $150 million into workforce and community development, affordable housing, homelessness, and parks. It would be the largest CBA in NFL history. Now, let's talk about that because there's some interesting numbers, Michael, about the support for the stadium as a standalone issue versus the support that we saw for the stadium and the Community Benefits Agreement. Would you go through that with us, please?
Yeah, this is the one thing that has been steady in the sense that the support for just the stadium reconstruction, the $775 million the city's kicking in, 41% support, 22 strongly, 19% somewhat. 58% of those oppose. So underwater by almost 20 points. But the community benefits agreement that you alluded to, which has the city kicking in $150 million and Jaguars matching at $150 million over 30 years, 81% support, 53% strongly, 29% somewhat. So 81-17, wildly popular. Then when we asked folks, okay, what about if you wrap this whole thing in a bow and it's $925 million with everything? Support goes from the 41% that just supported the infrastructure and the redevelopment of the stadium to 56% when you include the CBA. So that CBA pulled 15 percentage points of support into these categories. And I think that is really telling about where the city sits on giving money to Shad Khan for the stadium versus taking some of that money and then investing it in the city to help improve the surrounding areas.
I just wonder, And as we know, and we talked about this before the show, and we should again make people understand that we're taping this on the 11th of June. City Council is tonight going to be taking this up for a first reading. But unlike what many of us thought was going to happen, where we were going to see a number of separate bills that were going to be introduced, as Dr. Binder told us, no, instead they put it all into one 300 and some odd page bill that will be voted on once, and that will be for the whole shebang, if you will. I wonder, Michael, if the thought was, well, gee, if these are accurate numbers, and if the city council decides to go along with the responses that you received on the survey, then we might find that if we go to the city council with just the stadium, it may not get the support that we're hoping to get out of it. But let's put it all together, because it may end up being that the CBA ends up carrying the stadium.
There's a gigantic irony about this that it is hard not to really just kind of look at and shake your head at. Publicly, yes, the CBA is carrying the stadium, and without a doubt. But within those 19 votes on the city council, I would hazard a bet that they could have introduced the $775 million last month, when they revealed their big grand reveal, voted on it immediately, and it would have passed. They could vote on it tonight, and I think that 775 passes without question. The irony about this whole thing is the CBA, that portion might not pass, even though it's hands down the most popular piece of this entire chunk of legislation. And I think by linking them together, the mayor has created a situation where it's an all or nothing type deal. And there's an argument to be made, right? The package that was negotiated with the Jaguars was for this whole thing. It wasn't one piece here and one piece there. So I think it's a smart strategic move by the mayor. And ultimately, I think much like all of us had suspected, this thing is going to pass city council. It's just a matter of if it's 16 votes or 17 votes or whatever the number happens to be.
Let me make sure I understand. Is the CBA now included in the big 300 and some odd page bill, or is it going to be moved aside like Salem said and voted on it another time during the budget process?
It's a singular bill. Now, theoretically, I guess council, once it's introduced, could separate it. But as of right now, it is a singular bill. It's going to get introduced tonight. So it'll be a one-shot deal on the whole package.
Unless somebody who wants to break it apart introduces an amendment to start breaking it apart,
Correct.
Which then all of a sudden is you've got all kinds of issues and challenges to the whole bill.
Given what you just discussed about the results of the poll, what is the political risk or benefit to city council members deciding to either separate the CBA or kill it outright like Roy Diamond wants to do? What's the risk or benefit politically to do that?
I think there's several layers of risk and on folks' part, not just specifically Rory Diamond, but maybe some of the other council members as well. Listen, Shad Khan is an influential member of the political community here. And there are a lot of folks in kind of the political elite in Jacksonville that are supportive of getting this done. If you look at all of the endorsements that have come out from former mayors to organizations, civic council, to be the person that kind of breaks this thing apart and attempts to kill it, you run the risk of alienating that group of folks. And, if you have your eyes on further political futures here in the region, I'm not sure that's necessarily the smartest play.
Yeah, Mr. Hightower, you got a little experience in that, don't
you? That's high stake poker. I think Mr. Tolbert once or twice has used that, and you do it.
Well, I don't know that Lot J. Diamond cares.
Lot J. Diamond.
Well, I think he should if he's trying to redeem his terrible compromised reputation if he wants to run for Congress someday. I think he should step back and consider that. Maybe he's given that up, and I don't know. I find it hard to believe. Maybe the other thing was that there were some of the council members just said, you better get on the train or be under the train. It's interesting because, we've been, as we got ready for this show, Dr. Bender, we kept talking about there were going to be 7 bills, and we all talked about it ourselves as we got ready for the show, that, if you break it apart and you try to do the CBA earlier, then what's the leverage that you have to do it? So everybody's been sort of thinking there were going to be 7 bills. So I'll let Mr. Tolbert, but it may be that lessons learned, or they did some reflection on Lot J and said, let's see what the polling looks like, and let's roll it up and let's go for it. Maybe that's what happened. I think if it's all in one and they try to break away the CBA, I think they must have their 10 votes if they're going forward.
Sure. I absolutely believe that to be true. It's also true that, the CBA, hypothetically, if it were dealt with later, I wouldn't say that the Jaguars have zero incentive to pull out of that, right? There is something else coming down the road that the Jaguars need to keep goodwill with City Council. That's Lot J Part 2. Now, whether or not it's actually Lot J, but the development around the stadium, that's coming in the fall, right? That is absolutely, I would suggest the second that the NFL owners pass this and say yes at their meetings in October, the next day, you're going to see a rollout of what that development's going to look like around the city, around the stadium, and what the city's going to be kicking in for that, because that's going to be a big number too.
Not to get too much deeper into the weeds, but I'm wondering too that the strategy being used by putting all of these bills together in one, I wonder if that's going to make it more difficult for any individual council member to introduce any kind of amendments to this project that is going to get support from their colleagues, because now you're talking about changing the whole picture by just one amendment rather than taking it up as a single bill and you're just amending a single bill. So it might be more difficult to get anybody to really support an amendment that would, one of the things that we talked about was lessening the number of years that the Jaguars would put in their $150 million from 30 years down to 10 years or 15 years, because the money that obviously $30 million or $5 million a year for 30 years is what they're looking at, but $5 million in year 30 is going to look a lot different than $5 million in year one. Yeah. So I thought that someone might think about trying to squeeze that into a smaller period.
You've got to give the mayor and Mark Lamping credit with having these huddles out there and talking about that and getting. It goes back to what Tolbert said before. Talk to the community. I mean, that's what Jake was great at. He would go out there and talk to the community. You can't over-communicate. And I think that, I think there are, 7, Mike may help, 5 or 7 Democrats on there who are going to be loyal to her. Then all of a sudden you've got the civic council. Most of the members are huge political, if not donors, to the council members. All you need is 10. 10 is the magic number, correct, Mr. Tolbert?
I would think so. Dr. Bender, I'll refer to you. They don't need a super vote, do they? Or do they? I think David Berline told us that they needed a super vote to get it out on the 25th of June. Didn't he say that? I mean, this is we're talking about 2 weeks here, which normally is isn't it a 6-week process from once you introduce legislation till it usually comes out?
3 readings, so 6 weeks. Yes.
Yeah. So we're gonna do this in 2 weeks. So somewhere along the line, if I remember what David Berline said, that they're going to need to vote on it on the 25th of June. They're going to need to get a super majority of council to agree to that. But it sounded like to me they must not be worried about it. They must be confident they got it.
Yes, because they're having a special council meeting, I believe, on the 17th that is just for this. It's been assigned to the committee of the whole, so everybody's there. They're attempting to use these emergency procedures to rush it through so that this can happen under Salem's watch. That's a political game, I guess, for Ron Salem. He can look back in his retirement and say, hey, this got done on my watch. But it's whether it's 13 or whether it's 10, I'm not sure that it matters. I don't think that the votes are in jeopardy. I just don't see 7 members of council voting no on this. I think I was of the mindset that this would have passed the day that they announced it. So maybe I'm not the one to think.
No, I think you're absolutely correct on both of those.
I totally agree. And I'm biased on this one. I think we should have it. I remember what the other Mike Corrigan said last week when we talked to him, who's president of Visit Jax. He said 30 years ago, he was part of that committee. And he said 30 years ago, we made the decision we were going to be one of 32. And we knew back then that 30 years later, we were going to have to come back here and redo and look at that stadium. Mm-hmm. And I think that and it's very obvious that the Jaguars and the mayor and the people who are supportive of that have done their homework. And my feeling is hats off to them. I think congratulations, and I'm glad we're going to do it. Good for our city.
Let me go out of this lane for just a couple of moments and go back to the polling. Michael, tell us about the other items that you asked on this, including the job performances of some of our elected leaders. How did that come out, and how did that differ from the last poll you did back in September?
So we asked job approvals of the mayor, of city council writ large, of the sheriff, and also Melissa Nelson, even though her district expands outside of Duval and it's just Duval residents or just Duval registered voters that we asked about for her. And then also we asked about Shad Khan, and we ask about him occasionally when we do Jaguar stuff. All of their numbers were really pretty positive. And interestingly, Mayor Deege was at 63%, which was pretty high. The city council as a whole was at 48 to 42, so below 50, but above water with the don't knows in there. And then, TK Waters was at 64%. So the fact that Deegan and TK were so close, I think is, that's a little bit surprising in the sense that, TK was much more popular back in the fall. And then Melissa Nelson, popular, but she has a lot of don't knows as well. She was at 60%, 61%. And then Shad Khan was even at 60%. So I think, there's optimism around the Jaguars. I think there's optimism, or at least a wait and see when it comes to the mayor, because of that 63% job approval she has, 26 was strongly, 37 was somewhat. And even among Republicans, she had 41% support as opposed to 51% disapproval. So she's doing well enough amongst Republicans and has huge numbers of support amongst Democrats and independents.
Dr. Bender, you talked about Shad's number. This is my observation. With the Jaguars putting in 150 in the community, the CBA, I got to believe that made a difference. People have talked about, what is Shad Khan doing? He's a billionaire and all that. Everybody knows he owns the Jaguar. I got to believe that had something to do with people saying they're putting in something for the community.
I think there's certainly some merit to that. I also think that there's merit for regardless of how last season worked out with Trevor Lawrence being injured and them struggling down the end of the season. I think there's some general optimism around the team, and I think that they think there's going to be a bounce back year, and winning is the elixir, right? That solves all your ills. So I think there's that part of it as well, and I think that's probably more of it. I also think, and this really hasn't gotten talked about a ton, was as much as we talked about the gun behind the door about the Jaguars threatening to leave, there was never any public posturing about that. They didn't come out either subtly or not so subtly like other teams have done and say, hey, listen, if you don't do this, we're out of here. And that has happened in other cities. They did not do that. So I think that probably contributed a little bit as well.
By the way, and I'd say this to our listeners and our viewers too, please go to the UNF Public Opinion Research Laboratory's website, because they've got a breakdown of all of the numbers that are associated with Michael Binder's polling, and they're just fascinating. You see the demographic differences, the political differences, all of that is in there, so it's a great study. And if you're into polling like we are, it's a great way to spend the weekend.
We even broke it down by whether people are Jaguars fans or not, whether people go downtown for leisure or not. So there's a variety of different ways that you can look at some of the specifics on how each of these questions fleshes out.
Yeah, I was looking for the Bears fans category, and I didn't find it anywhere, but I'll keep looking, Michael. I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
Well, my associate director is a Bears fan as well, so.
When did you post this? I take it's already posted?
Yeah, it's been up for a couple of weeks. As soon as we came out with the poll, that came out with the press release. It went to the media right away.
Why? Not that I'm cynical. Maybe that's why we see. I know that. Maybe the political cynicism that maybe some of those 19 councilmen said, "Hey, have you seen this local poll yet?" And they went, "Maybe you better think about where we are." And
You mean they sometimes wet their finger and check to see what direction the wind is blowing?
Do you think they did that?
No. They would never do that.
I would give, let me tell you, if I was the mayor or if I was the Jaguars, and I would say, you got a concern, I'd be looking at those poll numbers. Yeah. Which I think really, to y'all, Mike Bender, y'all have done a great job to have that kind of following and that kind of reputation that people, one, are listening to you and they're reading it, and obviously it's making an impact. So kudos to UNF and to you and your team.
Well,
and we're delighted that you'll come on the program and talk about this and break it down with us and give us the background on it too, Mike.
I mean, I can't not come on the program. My name is Mike, right? It's named after me.
That's funny. Corrigan said the same thing.
I was just thinking, how many mics are there? We could, we should just have a mics one day.
Well,
and just
I get Weinstein on here to talk about the funding mechanism, right?
I tried doing that when I tried convincing him to come on this week, and I said, "Come on, Mike, keep the streak going. We're really doing well."
Yeah.
But we're really glad that you came on with us. We're glad that you joined us, even from out of the state. Have a pleasant trip back again, and we appreciate, Michael, everything that you do, and particularly with the work that you do with us. Thank you very, very much.
Mike.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. And UNF, we're part of this community, and we want to see this place get better. And I am of the mindset that the people's will ultimately is what drives this, and getting that voice heard, I think, is really important.
Well, and your political science department at UNF is also contributing tremendously to that as well. So thank you very much for that as well.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Next week, we have a very special program that we're doing. That'll be the third in our series on the stadium. But this time, we're going to the stadium. Mark Lamping is going to be our guest next week, and we're doing it from Shad Khan's conference room out at the stadium. It'll be the first time that Mike's on Mike goes on the road to try to do it, outside of a regular studio. We're all doing it one by going to our respective homes, but this time we'll all be together, and we'll be at the stadium to do next week's show with Mark Lamping, so we certainly hope you will join us for that.
Yeah.
Once again, our thanks to the Jacksonville Historical Society inside the Jacksonville History Center and the many supporters that we have through that organization. We thank you for joining us. Hope that you'll catch us every week on Facebook, on our website at www.mikesonmike.com, or on iPodcasts, or any platform where you get your favorite podcast. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. Have a good week. Take care.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.
Mike.